Blackline Field Notes, Issue.2. Reputation is built before the bid. So far, each one of these that we've been talking with you guys about have been things that I personally have experienced. And I would like to just, from our newsletter here this week, I would like to just read the introduction because I think that's a great way to start. Reputation doesn't start when the bid is submitted. It starts long before that. In fact, I'd argue your reputation begins the moment your boots hit the ground in the morning. The way you carry yourself, the way you're dressed, the emails you send, the proposals you prepare, and even the way you post online. All communicate something about who you are. Your reputation isn't built by one big moment. It's built through hundreds of small decisions that either strengthen or weaken trust. Long before someone compares your price, they've already formed an opinion about your company. That's why reputation is built before the bid. You know, one of the big things that I have struggled with over the years is probably fully understanding the power of reputation. You know, we talk about it and it's always easy when you're at an event and you talk about reputation. Quite frankly, it's easy when you're sitting on a podcast and you talk about reputation. But the reality is, reputation is something that it starts with the very first parts of your day. What you're going to do, how you're going to do it. And it's something that it's built over time. You know, you can't step onto a job site, your very first contract with a new client, and expect that you've built your reputation with them already. Yes, your reputation is building, and it's always building, so that reputation can get you to an opportunity with a new client, but then you're going to be building that reputation with them. And then you're going to have pitfalls and things that happen. And so today we're just going to talk about what it looks like to build your reputation and the lessons that are earned through experience. So, you know, before the phone ever rings, the way that before someone even calls about a project, there's a process to what you do when that happens. How do you answer the phone? And what is the appropriate way to handle that? What is the appropriate way to respond to an RFQ or an RFP? So you really have to look at and think about with intention what you're doing and why you're doing it. You know, the last time that I talked with you guys, I talked about my first big contract. And I think the first big contract, I wasn't necessarily building my reputation with intention. My reputation was building, and that's the reality of it. You're going to build a reputation either intentionally or just based on how you operate. But it should be intentionally because you want to control that narrative. You want to build something that has people call you because they want to work with you, rather than rather than people looking at you and being like, I don't know if I want to work with that guy. And personally, I've built and torn down my reputation. I've built it in the positive. I've torn it down. You know, I once heard a guy say on a job site that trust is like an egg. Man, when I say this, it still pisses me off because I remember the situation that I was in and I had lost trust. I hadn't. They had lost trust in me. And he said, you know, Josh, trust is like an egg. He goes, once it starts to crack, it's almost impossible to rebuild. Now, I struggle with that a little bit because I don't think that trust is impossible to rebuild. If that's the case, then any time that we lost trust with a friend or a family member, we would never be able to continue in relationship with them. I think there's a major difference between building back trust, building reputation, and maintaining boundaries. Being a nice guy versus being a good man. So you need to have processes in place before you even get invited to the bid. And some of those processes are, for us, is, well, what do we do when we get a bid invite? We actually call the client before we put together a proposal. At least we're supposed to. We are looking for value and things like that, and we want to talk with them about that because it changes something. Any of you who are listening, if you ever got a fax, and those of you who are 25 probably don't even know what I'm talking about, but gotten an invite, a fax, an invite, an email to a bid, and you just bid it, or say you send out a bid invite and people just bid it to you and they never call you. The truth is you don't feel as obligated to reach out to them because there's zero connection there. And reputation comes through communication and how you handle that communication. That first contract, I was worried about losing it, and so I just took the job without thinking. I think one of the biggest things that you initially have to look at in reputation that comes before the bid is that you need to be able to say no to projects that don't fit your skill set. You can't say yes to every single thing that comes around the bend. And that can be really hard when you need work, when you don't have work and you need cash flow. And don't get me wrong, I've taken projects that I had no business doing, but I needed the work. But there's a process and a way to do that. And once you've developed and built a reputation, you can be more honest about that process. I can remember calling a contractor that I worked with when I needed work, and I said, I needed an opportunity. And he said, well, we have this project, and it didn't fit our skill set. But I said, well, we can do it, and we can give it a shot this way. We might not be the best at doing it, but we can figure it out. And they gave us that opportunity because of our reputation. But knowing when you need to be like, no, that job is outside of my wheelhouse, is really important to building your reputation. Knowing not to take on the things that don't fit your niche or what you're trying to build. I personally, and this is just from my own experience, I personally don't think that it's wise to try to do everything, because then you're not good at anything. And so we have tried to really hone in, this is who we want to work with. This is the type of work that we want to do. And it doesn't always work that way. I would be lying to you if I said we only took projects with people that we want to work with. We only did the work that we want to do. But we know what that work is. And it's much easier to build on your reputation when you're going after things in that way. The invitation is earned. Some contractors always receive the first phone call. And it's because of the reputation that they've earned. It's because of what they have built before the bid. I don't want to be known as the cheapest contractor or the least expensive contractor. I want to have built a reputation that it's, people are looking at our price. And I love when I hear that they want that I was the lowest qualified bid. And qualified bid means that contractor or that client is actually looking at us and saying, you know what? They might not be low, but this guy doesn't have this, this, and this. And we want to go with them because we know that that's their number. They're going to do what they say they're going to do. And that's going to be the number that it's going to cost. I learned that myself when I had a specialty contractor that I brought on, and I did it wrong. I looked at the lowest number, I took the bid, and then I found out, he doesn't have this, he doesn't have that. And it ended up costing me more than what the next qualified bid was. And that actually damaged my reputation, definitely damaged theirs. To this day, I don't want to say that I don't work with them, but it changes the way that we look at working with them. So the invitation is earned by doing what you say you're going to do. And once you do that, and once you start to build that, you want invitations to bid projects from people who want to work with you. And that only comes from how you're building that reputation before you even get there. The things that you do, the things that you post, the way that you interact. And then what starts to happen is then people see that and then they want to work with you. Like, why is so-and-so always working with them? Why is so-and-so always choosing that company for that job? And then they're like, I'm doing that type of work. I should be getting a number from them. I should be asking them to look at the project. And then if you have that reputation built, the other factor is it's not about a race to the bottom. It's about trusting you that you have qualified numbers that you're giving them, that they know you're going to take care of the project. What clients want. If I were a builder, if I was building a bidders list, I'd begin with character and dependability. I want people who are going to show up. You know, even when I was managing projects as an on-site foreman, I can remember I didn't want the employee who was the least expensive or the most expensive for that matter. I wanted the employee who was going to be there to do the work and to get it done. I wanted people that were going to work with me that understood the importance of that work and that I could count on to show up and do it. And that's the same thing that people want when they're putting together a project team. They're looking for people who are going to look at the entire project, give them a full encompassing proposal, and bring that together. So the reality is that the best contractors don't simply price work. They help owners see the project more clearly. And that can be difficult in the low bid world, but again, that's back to why reputation is so important. When you're helping a client see these are the pitfalls that we see, you don't even have to price them sometimes, but you can say them. You know, you put your proposal together based on the documents that are provided. You know, if it's a plan and spec job, if it's a design build job, well, then you want to look at it, and your goal would be that there's never going to be any change orders on this job unless they change the entire design. But if it's your design and it's the way that you're looking at it, then you're able to provide them with solutions and help them see things that maybe they can't because they're not your specialty. You know, if you're a plumber and you're working with a client and they're doing an office building or whatever it is that they're doing, you might see things that they're not seeing in the design process. You might even see things that the designer that they've hired isn't seeing. But during the process of bidding the project, if you share certain things with them, that is going to communicate your reputation and who you are. And it's a risk that they might just take that information and not give you the job. But the reality is it's going to communicate something differently. And I think what clients want, what owners want, is they want to be able to see the project more clearly. And we're the ones that help them understand that and see that. You know, specialty contractors in particular are who general contractors, construction managers, and owners use to communicate to their teams, what is this? How does this work? And you do that knowing your expertise. No one can know all of it. And it's really great when you get on a team and someone thinks they do know all of it. That would be sarcasm in my voice. It's about the little things. When you're building reputation, it's the little things that really make a difference. When we begin with a phone call at the beginning of the relationship, that communicates, hey, I actually am paying attention to this bid that you sent me. I'm paying attention to this RFQ that you sent me and looking at what you want. When we show up on time and when we communicate what we see during that process, those little things like that, they make huge differences with the people that are asking you for a price. Matter of fact, when you call and you talk through situations or when you talk through things that you see in the bid with a project coordinator or with an estimator, depending on who you're working with, all of those things endear you to them and show that you, one, have an understanding of the project, and two, care enough to communicate it. And the other thing that happens then is they communicate that to you as well. I've been many a project where they're like, hey, you have the right number here, but we're calling you because it's like, we're wondering if you're looking at this different than these guys, and maybe they're, but all because of the reputation that was built. They're sharing information to make sure that we're protected, because that's what we do with them. Your employees definitely contribute to your reputation before your proposal arrives. They definitely, the way that they handle situations, and they handle situations the way that you teach them to do it. If you're always reacting and losing your cool, that's what they're going to do. If you are leading with a calm authority, that is where the power is. And then they see that, and then they operate like that as well. A reputation is worth investing in. It's worth taking the time to have a phone call. One of my favorite projects in my experiences was, we weren't low bidder, and we bid this project. It was we were asked to come bid it. It was an out of state project from where we were based, and they came to us and they said, here's our budget, and we put together a price. We looked at it, and there was no way we could meet their budget, and so we were over budget for them, and I thought that they were going to go somewhere else, but I never did this before. But I said to them, well, here's what we could do. If you trust us, and you're saying, they were saying that they wanted us to do this project, but they had to meet their budget. I said the reality was, if we were going to work together and efficiently work through the project, it was possible that we would come to the end of the project, and depending on what our profits were, we might be able to meet their budget. Like, we had certain metrics that we had to meet. And so with this particular client, in this particular situation, it was a rather large project over about a year and a half. And we came to the end of the project, and the savings was there. And one of the coolest things was, and this was huge in building our reputation. One of the coolest things, this was the electrical company that I founded, was when I was able to write them a check for that savings that they needed. And we had still made money because of the way we were able to manage the project with them and work together as a team. It was all about efficiency. Copper wire wasn't cheaper. The materials didn't cost less. The time didn't take less as far as what it takes to do the work. But the efficiencies in the project and the way that you were able to work together as a team saved us an exponential amount of money. Now, we didn't give it all back, but we gave the difference back. And that built huge reputation, which then turned into millions and millions of additional work. I think the biggest misconception with building reputation is that many contractors and many owners believe that it always needs to be the lowest bidder to win. Contractors are always like, I have to be low in order to win the project. And there are markets where price is the decider. And the reality is, you have to decide, is that the market that I want to work in, where it's not about the way I do the work. It's not about how I show up. It's about, was my price lower than the other guy? Was I more desperate than him? I think it's a misconception that you want to go after that type of work. Maybe I'm not using misconception right. I mean it in this sense. You feel like you can't grow a company or build a company if you can't be the low bidder. Well, that's just not true. You want to be bidding projects where you're able to give money back and be over budget. And I'm telling you right now that I was able to experience that. And then it came back to, hey, you weren't low here, but we know that this is what your number is going to be. And we won projects. And it's not every project. We got to be low a lot in the bid world. But the reality is, what that does for our reputation and how that builds is huge. And it's not just about being a low bid. The thing that it's going to reveal is who you're working with. It's going to reveal what is the reputation of these people that want prices from you. Do they want to build a relationship, or do they just want to get the project? Are they building relationships with their clients to build with you, or are they just trying to get work, get in, and get out? So like I said, I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Good, not just nice. I recently was having a conversation with my daughter, and I think this is pretty huge for reputation. She was talking with me about a guy and a situation, and I said, you want to find a guy that isn't a nice guy. And she looked at me kind of funny, and I said, you want to find a good man, not a nice guy. And this is what I mean by this. A good man has boundaries, things that he sets in place and he holds to, protects certain things that are of value, whether in relationship, in business, whatever it might be. A nice guy goes along to get along. And the reality is, we don't need any more of that in this world. We don't need that at work, in business. I can remember thinking that was a good thing when I would be working on a project and there was a project manager who was just like, there were never any problems, never any hard conversations, never any boundaries being made. And guess what? When everything went off the rails, it all blew up and it was everybody else's fault. What you want to be and who you want to work with are people who understand what it is to have boundaries, to set them in place and be able to hold to them. I just recently had a conversation with one of our clients at Blackline where it was a rather large specialty contractor. And the president of the company had sent his son to work for another company because he wanted him to get experience before he would come work for them. And the funny story is he never came back to work for them, and now he works for this huge general contracting firm, and they hired them on, and his son had to call him one day and be like, hey, Dad, your team isn't stepping up. They're not getting the work done. They're not staying on schedule. And he had to have that hard conversation with him. To his father's credit, his father was like, that is like the greatest moment of my life being reproved by my son. And I thought, wow, what an interesting thing to say. He didn't put that on his son that, you don't understand or this or that. He saw that his son was setting up boundaries. He was being a good man and holding those things in place so that they understood what was expected of them to do the job and there weren't any surprises. I think that when we're in relationships and we don't have healthy boundaries and we're not telling people what they want to hear, that's being a nice guy. That's being, nice to someone and not being a good human where it's like, these are the boundaries that I want to set in place. And so I'm going to tell you, hey, that's not okay. You need to be able to have those conversations if you're going to build any type of reputation at all. Here's the field note for this week. Every company carries a reputation. Your reputation is what people say about you when you're not in the room. It's just that simple. And the reality is you might often not know what that is until much, much later. And so that's why it's important to look at the things that you're doing before you even get there to make sure that you're building a reputation that lasts. The little things become the big things. Daily habits become lasting trust. As you build that reputation over time, that gives you that credibility. Back to the guy that said, trust is like an egg, and once it cracks, yeah, but the reality is, over time, as you build a reputation, you can build something that is strong enough to withstand if you have an off day. It starts before the bid. It starts before the proposal. And before the first dollars change hands. That's when your reputation building starts. How you handle communication before you're ever sending in an invoice. Step up to the line this week and remember, your reputation is building.